Converted Man here, and I've got Skeptic Skeleton.
Hello.
Yeah, say hi.
Hello. I am the
Hello.
Skeptic Skeleton.
All right, well, thanks for being here. Okay, goodbye, everybody. No. So, yeah, your channel's in the description, of course, and I don't remember how I stumbled onto you, but I did, and I'm like, oh, another skeptic, yay! So I added you to my collection, and you're a skeleton, so that's fine, I guess. So why are you a skeleton? And I guess we'll start with that. Yeah.
Two reasons primarily. The first one being is that I just think skeletons look cool. And secondly, it's a little bit of symbolism. I deliberately tried to pick a skeleton so that I have sort of stripped myself of as much bias as possible, to sort of get rid of as many assumptions and biases as possible. Obviously, there's still a skeleton, there's still bones, so there's still going to be some biases, but the goal is to try to remove as many as possible.
Yeah. And how long have you been a skeptic, or were you what was your religious background growing up, or anything? What's your story in brief?
Basically, I came from a religious family, and I really didn't question it all that much until I got to college and I started to study philosophy. And that really got me to question what it was that I believed. Not even necessarily why I believed it, but what exactly it was. So I said I believed in a God, but I couldn't honestly tell you what a God was. It was just a thing that existed outside of time and space and affected time and space, and we should worship it because it took human form to die for us on a cross because reasons.
Yeah, so you were brought up like in a Christian sort of household, went to church and things like that then, or was it?
Yes.
Okay. So was it a big deal, or was it just sort of what I've sort of been calling it American Christianity, where you just kind of go to church on Sundays and maybe you pray at dinner, but there's not really like deep intellectual talk about God unless you're at church?
So it started out not being a big deal, where we just believed in the base story, but never read any of the other stories in the Bible. All we knew was Genesis and Jesus, and that was it. But then my mother married a pastor. So when that happened, we got super religious and super into things. We still didn't actually read the Bible. We just went to church like every Sunday and Wednesday and had, and I kid you not, 6-hour-long sermons.
Oh my. Is that like that sounds like maybe like more Catholic than or Lutheran, or maybe Baptist, because they like to go on. Or the other thing I could think of would be like a gospel church where you have a long service, but the sermon itself usually isn't that long. It's longer because of the music. So was it any of those, or just that's what it was?
No, it was the sermons were, so it was divided up a little bit. So there would be the one pastor, for the most part, would always speak, and he would speak for 3 hours straight. We would have a 15-minute break, and then he'd go for another 3 hours. If we had to pick, because they did the whole non-denominational thing, but if I'm being honest, they were Baptists. They just didn't want to call themselves Baptists, but that's basically what they were. And because my stepfather was a pastor in the church, he had he had various roles and positions assigned to him. So it wasn't just that we were there all day listening to the 6-hour sermon. We had to be there early because he had to open up the building, and we couldn't leave until everybody else left. So literally, church was my entire Sunday.
Wow. Was it like a big church, like a mega church, or like just a large one? Or
I would say it was probably a relatively small church, but for reasons that I don't quite understand, they had a giant cathedral available, but it was never full to capacity, like never even close, even though that's what was prophesied.
Do was there mixed age group, or was it pretty much all older type people, except for maybe the kids of whoever was coming? Or
There was pretty much, it was predominantly elderly people, but there was predominantly elderly people and children. There was usually no in between. I am in the middle, so I was kind of like the exception to the rule. They had younger people, but there were controversies in the church that led to the younger people leaving, and we don't talk about that. So
yeah. Is something that made this church split into two, or
no, it was something specific. It was a controversy specifically going on with the two. So there were two young people, but they were like older than me at the time. I was in high school when I first got into this church. They were like college students. And the pastor has a way of manipulating his influence on people. And they didn't like the way that he was manipulating his influence on people, so they left.
A different pastor from
the same pastor that was giving the 6-hour sermons. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So your stepdad then, or?
Yeah, stepdad.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of get a.
Oh no, my stepdad is this pastor that's doing these things. My stepdad is a separate pastor.
Oh, okay, right. That's what I was trying to clarify. Like, there's more than one pastor. So Pastor A, Pastor B.
But this was the head pastor that was causing the vast majority of the problems.
I see. Yeah. Wow. And then so you got into, eventually you said you got into college, and then you were confronted with these. Did you take a class in philosophy, or how did that come about?
The first, because I was majoring in journalism at the time, and I just needed electives, so I just took a philosophy of religion class, and it was the greatest decision I've ever made, because that really made me question. Because going to college, because I had gotten more serious with religion, I was determined that I was going to prove the existence of God. I was going to find the answer nobody else could find. I was going to shut it down. I was going to end the
Hey, you took my idea. That's what I did when I was a Christian. I'm like, I'm going to prove this true. Here we are. That's what happens.
That's what happens. So that's what I set out to do, and then I signed up for the class because I thought it would be interesting, and if I'm being perfectly honest, I thought it would give me ammunition to prove the existence of God. Because it was a nice mix inside the class of different kinds of beliefs and atheists. And when someone asked me what a God was, and I couldn't give a straight answer, that really started to. That's where the transition started. It's like, well, when I say something is a chair, I can define it. I can give specific features of it, and I can demonstrate it. When I say something's a God, I don't know what it is. I just know it's not like everything else, and it's like outside of everything, but it's a thing. And See how it doesn't make sense in and of itself, how I've said nothing. I just said it's a thing a bunch of times.
It's it's just it's God. That's what it is.
A really good example of how sometimes Christians sound, and when they talk about God, it's like when you say you have a girlfriend, but she doesn't go to this school and you haven't met her. So when they're like, okay, let me see her. Oh, we didn't take any pictures together. Okay, well, where does she live? Oh, she lives somewhere out of town. And you're just not getting any specific details about the girlfriend, but people swear up and down it's there. It was the same thing with God. It's more or less I realized that I didn't understand what I said I believed. So then I came to the conclusion that I didn't really believe it if I can't really, say what it is.
Was that difficult emotionally, or was it just kind of a smooth sailing through that? Or
for me, it was kind of smooth just because I did a lot of research on the subject, and I have always prioritized the truth above my own feelings, at least as much as I can. So when I said I was going to go out and prove God, I always was open to the possibility that I could be wrong. And if that's what the truth is, that's what I want to know. I don't want the truth to be whatever I decided it is. I just want to figure out what the truth is so I can work from there.
And how did you decide on the label of skeptic? How did that come about?
Well, because that was the first time I realized that I wasn't skeptical in my life and that I pretty much just went with whatever was around me. So I was raised in a fairly liberal home with democratic beliefs, and I just assumed that those beliefs were good because that's what I was raised in. I couldn't actually defend them. I could just repeat what other people told me, but I didn't have any good reasons for the things that I believed. Basically, it started with Christianity, and once I realized, hey, I've not been skeptical about this thing. I've just been buying whatever someone's been selling me. Then I started to look into other things I believed, and I'm like, well, I'm buying everything everybody's selling me. And then I realized that I had to, if I really care about the truth, I had to reform my approach to information, my approach to investigation, to be skeptical rather than just going with what sounds right.
Yeah. Okay. You're having a little bit of audio pops there. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that. But, yeah. I don't know. I was like, yeah. Oh. Yeah. I didn't need my ears. I blame Math Pig. Yes. Math. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and then at some point you decided to get on YouTube. What spurred that? Why did you feel compelled to be kind of an advocate, if you will, for skeptical thinking?
Primarily because I had a lot of opinions on a lot of things, and just journaling them or writing them down wasn't doing it for me. I just had a lot to say about a lot of things, and I wanted to be a part of the discussion. And since to be perfectly honest, I had a separate Twitter account before this one. I got in trouble in Twitter a lot anyway. So I well, like actually put my voice out there, and if I'm wrong, I can hear back from people. It's just when you have so much in your mind to say about so many different topics, it's like, let me just get it out.
Oh, it's hard when you realize everybody but you is wrong,
Well, of course.
Yeah, no.
And everyone needs to be educated by the only right person.
Yeah, exactly. No, but of course, I'm joking. But okay, now the word skeptic, of course, has had different meanings to different people, and so is it questioning reality? Is that part of it, or is that too far? Or is it more kind of a general idea of this sort of the philosophy of doubt until proof is given? Or how do you frame your particular version of the word?
Yeah, so I don't take skepticism to that degree. I use skepticism to the degree that it's useful in my everyday life. So technically, you could make the whole skeptical argument about, is reality real? But I don't think that functionally changes anything about how we live our lives. Regardless of what reality is, it's something, and we're still here.
Yeah.
We still got to do stuff. So I only apply my skepticism to things that I feel it's kind of like the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence kind of thing.
Right.
If someone tells me they had breakfast this morning, I'm not gonna that has no real consequences. So I don't feel the need to demand stringent evidence for that. But when someone tells me that they believe in an omnipotent Jewish zombie that died because of rules that he made, I got to ask some questions about that.
Great. Yeah, and that's been kind of my thing as well. Is the label skeptic was something that I kind of was thrust on me in a way, and I was like, no, that sounds right, and I saw that you could doubt like all the things. I was like, that's a bit too much, but I did run it through the system of logic and reason and critical analysis, like, okay, well, let's question reality and see where that goes. And you get to this point and you're like, okay, well, there's no evidence that it's any of these things that it could be. So it doesn't matter that it could be something else. The only evidence we have is that this is it. There's no, like Truman shows, like a light fell down, and there was other weird events, that allowed him to see what was really going on, so there's nothing like that, and until there is, then you got to go with what appears to be the things that are real.
Exactly. If this is, because in philosophy we go through the whole brain in a vat, matrix, demon dream argument, but regardless of whether we're in the matrix or in the demon dream or any of those things, unless there's like a way to get out, we're still here and we still have to deal with the reality that we have to deal with, whether it's real that it's going to rain tomorrow or it's just in a demonic dream that's going to rain tomorrow. It's still going to rain tomorrow. And that's still something that we have to deal with within whatever context this is.
Right. So yeah, it's just kind of it's an axiom, and we move on. And go, okay, reality is real. Now what? So what would you say is, or do you have formulated your epistemology?
I guess I don't have a specific epistemology. I guess. I just try to understand things to the best degree that I can. And if I find it compelling, I'll believe. And if I don't find it compelling, I won't. And that might sound overly simplistic, but I can't become an expert in everything overnight. So there's some things where it's like, and we don't have to get into this, but the coronavirus situation. I'm not an expert on that. I haven't studied the science and the biology behind it. So I'm not going to go around saying it's the 5G towers and we need to burn them. I'm just going to say, I don't know. This is what the best experts say. And to the best of my knowledge, this is where it seems to indicate. If some new piece of evidence comes out that says the coronavirus actually isn't real and it actually is the 5G towers, and that evidence is substantiated and compelling and has studies behind it and different things like that, then I might be compelled to believe. But I'm not going to believe because one dude on Facebook said he talked to a couple of friends of his in the hospital. Like that's not good enough. I need
I mean, 5G has been around a while, so I would think it would have shown up a long time ago, and all this sort of, but it reminds me, I don't know if you remember this, there was a thing with when they were, the high wires were first like really becoming a big thing, and all these little towns that were like, oh, we're getting all these cases of cancer, it must be the wires, and it was this association causation without any connection that they were making. And it's like, no, this is just, that's not what's going on. And then eventually it's just kind of like faded out, like people forgot that it, it just went about. It was like, yeah, it's probably not that, okay. But I'm sure there's somebody that's hanging on to that. It says, no, it's the power alliance, because there's, when you see a pattern, it's really hard to, not grab onto that.
Yeah. So, my stepfather, the same one that's a pastor, is also a flat earther, and he is that the earth is flat, and nothing I say can deter him. And he asks,
oh no,
I know people say things. I know people say that there's no such thing as a stupid question, but when you make an illogical inference from a question, then the question becomes stupid.
Yeah.
So, for example, he will say, "Well, if the Earth is flat, why is the moon out?"
What?
Exactly. I don't see.
Because lobsters exist. Yeah, that's why. Yeah.
Like, what do those two things have to do with each other?
Yeah, why does he think that? Is it because he thinks that's what the Bible says, or?
Well, no, he got that from my grandfather on my mother's side, who is an even worse conspiracy theorist, because he believes Michelle Obama's a man, that that Barack Obama is gay, that their children are imported from Spain, and Barack Obama is a Kenyan Muslim. Because of course, why not?
When did the lizard people show up?
Well, the lizard people actually did factor in.
Oh man.
Do you remember, again, this is a little bit of a side issue, but you remember that I believe it was a summer where Trump was getting rid of his cabinet and constantly switching people in and out?
Yeah.
According to my grandfather on my mother's side, that was because he was finding out that they were lizard people and he was excommunicating them because he is a savior that is prophesied in the Bible.
Well, okay. Well, why not? Yeah, I mean, you've got plenty to draw upon for content. I mean, it sounds like you've got no shortage of content that you'll be able to draw from in your for just your own real life, let alone what's on YouTube.
And those were just really good examples of how, even though most people don't believe those things, obviously, my father doesn't even think twice. He doesn't actually question whether or not these things are true. He just goes, well, it looks flat. And then there's these other people that agree with me, so I must be right.
Yeah.
I never wanted to.
Yeah, it's very weird. I've yet to interact with a flat Earth person. I've seen people, do it in various ways, and I'm just like, I mean, I'd have my own questions that to ask. It's just really odd. It's just one of those like, okay, well, why? Why? Like, it looks this way. Okay, well, that's fine, but that doesn't mean it is that way. Like,
exactly.
You haven't done a lot of exploring. It's kind of like if you see a wall and it seems to go on and on and on, it doesn't mean it goes on indefinitely.
Exactly.
So it's like you could say it's an infinite wall, but you wouldn't. You couldn't ever know that it was an infinite wall. So,
which is actually that's a good point that kind of brings us back to the God thing. So, in terms of God being omnipotent, how would you I can't imagine a way that you could actually test that, because there's a difference between being omnipotent and looking omnipotent. So God doesn't actually have to be all powerful. All he has to do is be able to fool you into thinking he's all powerful.
Yeah, right.
Most Christians could probably do that.
Right. I mean, I had this whole talk with this guy that was saying that God exists and it's just, aliens that are really, intelligent or whatever. And it's like, okay, but it's not really omnipotent, but he's like, yeah, but it's close enough. So it's like tall is subjective, what tall is. There's no real definite definition. And he's like, it's kind of like that. And it's like, okay, but then it's not, then you don't, I mean, then it's anything you want it to be. He's like, no. I'm like, but it is, because if you say that it doesn't really have, and who says it has to have these omni attributes anyways?
Exactly.
It's like, well, a lot of people have agreed to that. That doesn't make it what it is. There's a whole problem. There's this problem of, what things would make a thing qualified to be a god, and it's like, well, until we have the example of it, it's just. It's anything you want, and
exactly.
So it appears to be an object of the mind rather than something that's concrete, at least with with numbers. I know some people think that numbers are like real rather than just objects of the mind real.
Yeah.
I forget. I think Matt Number File did a thing about that at one point, way back when. I'd have to find, but and I mean, there's like it's difficult to talk about, because like the one, it's real, but it's only real in our brain. It's not. You can't find one in nature. There is no one plant that grows.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, what is your definition? And I get into this a lot. What is your definition of real? What is your definition of exists? Because you have to talk about things in different contexts. Technically speaking, any idea exists as an idea, as long as it's not self-contradictory. But that doesn't mean that it exists in the real world. And it's important to note that 4 is like not a claim about reality. So it doesn't really have a true or false value. It's not like when you say 4, you're making a claim about the real world. You're not. You're just expressing an idea.
Yeah, it's a unit value and all that. Yeah. And it gets...
Yeah. Now, if you said there is a 4 out there in the wilderness, that's a claim. We can check that. We can go see if that's true or false. But if you just walked up to me and said 4, like, What do I do with that?
What do you? Yeah, like for exists. Bye.
Like, okay.
What? Dishwashing liquid. Okay.
And
Bye.
when you say God, yeah, and when you say God exists, but he exists outside of time and space, what does that mean? What does it mean for something to exist and not be in any sense of reality?
Yeah,
That
I mean,
sounds like something imaginary.
yeah. When people say that, I go, okay, well, you've left it with no when and no where to be. So, you've basically made it not exist. I mean,
Yeah, like there are a whole lot of non-existent things outside of time and space. How do we know God didn't accidentally slip into that category?
well, okay, so God's knocked out of the picture. What about like afterlife or souls or spirits or something like that? Do you have any room in your skeptical view for any of that stuff, or are you
I'm
just as dated as I am?
I'm open to all ideas, but the ideas have to make sense. So the idea of an afterlife doesn't really make sense because I feel like it's not an afterlife, it's just immortality. Because if you die, then you die. But if you continued on to something else, you never really died in the first place. You just moved from one place to another. And I don't understand what a soul or a spirit is. So I don't understand what it could or couldn't do or how it moves or how it doesn't move. No one, and this is just my personal experience, no one's been able to give me a coherent definition of the soul that makes any sense to me. So it's like a thing that's like inside you, but it's like not physical, but it like gives you life and lets you do things. And then like when your body dies, this thing that I haven't defined moves somewhere else, depending on what religion you believe in.
Right.
And I'm like, I still don't understand what it is. So that's when it comes to the soul specifically or spirits, I don't know what they are because they seem to have contradictory like qualities because it's there, but it's not like physically there. So I don't know what it means to say it's there if it's not like physically there. If it doesn't have any physical attributes, I don't understand in what sense it exists.
Yeah, is it like energy or
yeah. And if it's energy, then just call it energy. Why are you calling it something else? Just call it energy. And then if you take the idea of energy with the afterlife thing, how does energy move to, unless like, is heaven and hell, like, are they their own separate universes? Are they their own separate dimensions? Are they in the universe? We just can't access them?
Right. Like, I mean, you bring more problems once you also add to the afterlife the other things of the afterlife. Like, I mean, it's just one problem in and of itself to say that, you don't ever really die. Like, yeah, your body does, but you, the whatever that is, that doesn't. So there's like, okay, well, what do you do with these? Because there's plenty of them. The unanswerable questions of, well, what's consciousness? What do you do with a question that we can't answer like that?
I just say I don't know. I'm very honest and not ashamed to just be like, I don't know. For two reasons. One, when you say you don't know, that's how you learn things. Because if you start off with, I've got all the answers, then you've effectively blocked off any other answer. Also, I got to be honest. I believe that the truth is the best. There's a phrase, I'm trying to think of it, intellectual honesty, that I really wholeheartedly embrace. And it's, if I don't know something, I have to be honest and say I don't know it, rather than coming up with a bunch of rationalizations for what it maybe kind of could be. If I don't know, I don't know. I don't know exactly what consciousness is, honestly. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not having all the answers because I'm never going to know everything. And you got to get real comfortable with that, or else you're just going to start making up answers to unanswerable questions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then, of course, if the universe began, or if the word began even makes sense in that context, and, all those sort of things. Typically when we're dealing with theists, and I saw you did your series on the one, and you get, when we say evidence, they give us an argument. And that's frustrating because arguments aren't evidence. They might contain a thing of evidence, but then it's like, oh, just give me what's the evidence? And it's like, and then of course it's usually something that's completely logical fallacy or just not something verifiable. Have you heard anything that gave you pause lately, or anything that you were like, well, anything interesting at all, or?
Pretty much, like, the reason I did a response, and I still have one more video to do on this girl. I might do more videos on her, but it's just, this might sound a little harsh, but she's an untapped gold mine. She has a lot of videos that express common Christianity. So in one of the comments of my video, someone pointed out that she's not exactly the most articulate debater. She's not giving the like top tier arguments, which if there are top tier arguments,
I haven't heard them.
Yeah, but
you mean like the most popular ones? Maybe.
Exactly.
All right.
But I'm trying to, like, my videos are not just, hey, let me just make fun of this girl. I'm trying to show to people this is what's wrong with this line of thinking. And her view is more common than that of like William Lane Craig, which, don't get me wrong, I've run into a fair few people who cite him as their reason, but most Christians by and large do not believe because of arguments like William Lane Craig do. They believe because of the reason she gave, because the earth looks complex and something can't come from nothing, because of things like that. And if
we don't know. We don't even know what nothing is, or if even nothing is a thing that can be in the first place. So it's like, and of course, with Lawrence Krauss, of course, he had the idea that nothing is unstable, and I'm like, well, what the bleep does that mean?
Yeah. Like, and she gave an example in one of her videos where she was like, how I don't understand how people can, if you were on it's the abandoned island analogy. If you were on an abandoned island and you saw a hut, you wouldn't think it just arose by itself. You think someone built it. And I pointed out to her that has nothing to do with how complex it is. That's because you know what a hut is. If you didn't know what a hut is, you would look at it like the grass and the trees. You'd be like, oh, what's that thing?
Yeah. Especially what if it had grown out of, like it could have been a tree that grew in that shape, with the right pressures placed upon it for all.
Exactly.
But the thing only works when you know what it is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and then if everything was designed, then there'd be no way to make the analogy anyways, because the watch or the hut and the island would be exactly the same. They would.
So, and I believe I said this, or I at least hope I did. So you on this abandoned island, you would, because she pointed out the hut specifically, but you didn't point out the wood that the hut is made out of. You didn't point out the sand or the water or the trees. You looked at the hut specifically and nothing else, which means it's not based on just stuff existing and being complex. Because when a tree grows out of nowhere, you're not that impressed. You're not like, who put this tree here? Where did it come from? It must have had an intelligent designer. You're like, no, that's what trees do. They grow in places, just like grass, just like branches, just like all this other stuff. So it's not a fair comparison to take what you know to be man-made things and compare that to be naturally occurring things that seem to function on their own. And she was like, well, if we could do that for a hut, why can't we do that for a universe? And I pointed out that the universe is not a hut.
It's a little bit different,
Yeah, just a little bit.
A few more rules to the universe than there is to a hut, maybe.
Exactly. Just pointing out basic stuff like that, I think, more helpful to reaching people, because that's really what my ultimate goal is I'm going to reach people. I don't necessarily expect to reach the person I'm responding to, but hopefully an audience can see what I saw and say, wait, that doesn't make sense, and just have the conversation. I don't want to force people to believe anything or anything like that. It's just a matter of,
well, let's ferret that out a bit, because you've said makes sense a couple of different times. I want to figure out what you mean by that. It's like, okay, well, how do I, because I mean it does seem to make sense. It's like, well, I had parents and they had parents, and if I keep going back, then, well, if I didn't know anything about evolution or whatever, I could do, well, eventually then those parents had like you know, like some parents that had to be beyond the earth because the earth wasn't there, and then you have like God parents that are actually God, you know. So that makes sense in a way, but so what do you mean by if it makes sense or not?
When I say that, I guess I am. I'm trying to get people to reevaluate the conclusions that they've already accepted. So, in that instance, that might seem to make sense to someone, but then I question why. And that's my style is just, okay, so you say this makes sense. So we go back, and at some point, we just went from parent, 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 parent to godparent. That seems like an awfully big jump. And why doesn't the godparent require a parent?
Mm-hmm.
Even if the godparent required like one parent before them, how do you know the godparent is the first parent? How do you know there's not a super godparent that's the first parent, and then that created the godparent, and that created the parents? So just questioning how these things make sense, basically. If someone says something makes sense, I want to try to break it down into its smallest parts and see if each part is coherent with all the other parts.
It's turtles all the way down, or lobsters all the way up, if you
prefer.
The lobsters are holding the planet up, whereas the turtles are pushing it up. But there's a war that's anyway.
The lobsters and the turtles.
That's right, and the lobsters are winning. You hear that, Finite? You'll know he doesn't care. Anyways. This deconverted man lore that nobody cares about but me. So I guess we got down to, if you will, the bones of the matter with, you know, trying to make sense of things and trying to get other people to make sense of things. Is this sort of like have you looked at, say, street epistemology or so is that, because I can't do that. That's just not a thing I'm good at. Like I'm you know, I mean, it's a good thing to do, I think, but it's not for me.
That's okay.
Yeah, but I think there's different ways to do things. Like, and then for me, it's logic. That's my primary, you know, focus is showing the logical fallacies and talking about, you know, the various, you know, formats and, you know, the structure of logic and it's, you know, what it can and can't do and all that.
Yeah.
And it's more like almost a Aristotle sort of approach. It seems that you have like sort of a street epistemology of, well, why do you believe that sort of approach? Is that closer? Or?
Yeah, I think that is. That's actually where I live. There was an atheist group that I was just starting to get involved in before all of this happened. And they suggested street epistemology, which is something that I would love to do just because, in case you haven't noticed, I do like to talk. And I like to talk to people. And I like to, it's like a reflection thing. When you show someone, the Socratic Method, that's what I meant.
Yeah, Socratic Method. I don't know why I said Aristotle. I meant, you know what I meant.
Yeah, I knew what you meant. You're able to break something down and show them, so what you're saying is this thing, do you really think that makes sense? And in my experience, when you break it down that way, most people don't. They'll try to reshape it. So if I say, so what you're saying is you believe in an omnipotent Jewish zombie, I'm fairly certain most Christians are not going to say yes to that. They're going to be like, no, it's more complicated than that. There's also a Holy Spirit. There's also this, that, and the other thing, even though that's what it is. If Jesus is God, he's omnipotent. He was Jewish on earth, and he is a zombie because he came back from the dead. So he fits the criteria perfectly.
Well, I mean, I'd also argue even further, though, that his followers also are encouraged to become zombies because he said to eat of his flesh.
Yes.
I mean, that sounds like something a zombie would say. Yeah. I have a blog thing that I did where the reason that you can't find Jesus' body is because his followers ate him.
Yeah.
And that's just as plausible of a reason as all the other reasons that come up. Actually, it's more plausible than the other ones. Like a natural explanation is always going to win out over the supernatural. What is, what the bleep is, and this is again with this identification. What do you mean by supernatural? Well, the things that aren't natural. Like what? Like, give me an example.
Tell us what it is. That just tells us what it's not.
Yeah, and I often get the most common example I get is love or relationships, which are both absolutely grounded in mundane stuff that you could empirically examine and test and do all sorts of things with. But it's like,
exactly. So this is a good example of what I was just talking about. So if someone brings up the love thing, so I'm like, oh, so you're saying God isn't an entity, it's an emotion, because that's what love is.
No, love is more than an emotion. That's the next claim.
Well, that's the first time I've heard that. Most people usually go, no, God's not an emotion. But then I'm like, so it's basically, I try to get to nail someone down on something. If you're going to say God is like the wind, okay, what is the wind? Wind is made up of specific things. Are you saying God is made up of those specific things? No. Okay, then how is God like the wind? Well, you can't see it. And it's like, okay, but you can't see stuff that doesn't exist. So how do you separate God? How do you make God similar to the thing that you're saying it is, but not non-existent either? Because I can also just say something is like love, but as we established, saying something doesn't make it true.
Right. I mean, at least you could test the wind.
Exactly.
You can't, apparently, you can't test God.
Yeah, I was going to say, even to a certain degree, you could test love. Like, I don't know if this is true or not, so please do not quote me as saying this. This might be entirely wrong. I have not done my research. But the conception that chocolate can generate the same chemical reactions as love would kind of demonstrate that love is a physical thing. So it's not this mystical thing we don't understand. And even if it was, that wouldn't mean that God is automatically like that. Even if love was as mysterious and mystical as everyone says it is, that doesn't mean you can open Pandora's box and just say anything is like that.
Yeah. Okay, let's go with the thought experiment of meeting the meeting Q, basically, from because you're saying, well, if it was powerful, if it had abilities that we didn't have, it could trick us into thinking that it was and say it was God. Although yes. I don't have any hang up with that word. I'd be like, okay, whatever. I don't care if that's what you want to be. You're God, whatever. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other. But at least I'd have something new to talk about. But I wouldn't necessarily just believe that it was actually God. And so then of course the question is always, well, what would prove it to you? It's like, well, we're not even there yet. We don't even have the entity Q here to talk about. So, I mean, let's get that going first, and then we'll deal with it when we get him to talk to and interview, right? But these sort of thought experiments are useful to some extent, because it challenges our ideas. That is to say, and of course, well, you'll be accused, if you haven't been yet, that you think that there's no God. Is that a fair statement that you're willing to say there's no God, or is it just no particular, like no Yahweh? I'm happy to say that. Oh yeah, absolutely, no Yahweh. But other gods, I don't know. It depends what they are. I don't know what you got.
Yeah. So there are different kinds of, or as far as I understand it, different variations of atheism. If I had to pick an identity, I would probably fall under atheist, which, as far as I understand it, doesn't believe because the concepts are not clearly defined and not coherent. So to me, when someone says God, I don't know what that means. So I can't say whether no God exists or some God exists, because it depends on who you talk to, what their definition of God is. And then when I get to their definition of God, the definition doesn't make sense in and of itself. So then I can't say there is a God or there isn't a God, because you haven't given me anything that makes sense to begin with. So if you say there's a thing out there, and I'm like, okay, but what's a thing? Oh, well, it's a thingy thing. And I can't say if it's out there or if it's not, because I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, it's akin to maybe the problem of identifying what supernatural is, even if it was actually a thing, because by the definitions that are given to it, there's no test that you can run that you can't hope to exhaust all natural tests.
Exactly.
And so it could always be a natural thing, and you're just mistaking it for the supernatural. So the only way to identify it is just appeal to ignorance and go, oh, I guess it's supernatural. It's like, well. So,
yeah, but I would say it might be even worse than that, because when you open the door to supernatural explanations, you have to contend with all of them, not just the one you came up with. So
right.
if you want to say it's a supernatural explanation, all right, how do you know it wasn't Satan? As far as I'm aware, and I believe I pointed this out, there are wizards in the Bible. So I think it's in Isaiah somewhere.
Yeah, witches and there's magic and
Exactly. So then how did you rule out the other supernatural explanations once you've opened that door? Someone asked me a really good question about Christianity when I was Christian. And they said, how do you know God is the good guy and Satan is the bad guy?
It's a great question.
And of course, the immediate response is, well, the Bible says God's the good guy. But if the Bible is, air quotes, divinely inspired by God, of course he would write himself as the good guy. We haven't even gotten to the side of the story. So all you know is a guy said he was the good guy, and you just ran with that.
And you know what they did? Somebody very clever heard that, that was thrust at somebody's foot at some point. Because it's encoded into the Bible. The only unforgivable sin is to accuse God of using Satan's power. Although other people have different ideas of what the unforgivable sin is, but that's one version. So it's like somebody somewhere was was pretty smart on the uptake and be like, oh no, you can't say that because it's the only unforgivable thing. Like, yeah, God will forgive you of anything except for that. But it said anything. No, except for that.
God's all powerful, but he can't forgive that? Well, I didn't say he couldn't. He just won't.
He won't. Right. It's not it sending you to hell. You're sending yourself to hell.
That's actually okay. So this might be a bit of a spoiler, but that's actually the next video I'm going to do is the same girl, her video on hell, and it's exceedingly difficult because I try to stay as balanced and composed as I can in my video. But she makes pretty much claims that, like, yeah, by virtue of being born and not being Jesus, you just automatically deserve to go to hell. Wow. And I'm like, how? How is that?
Wait, that's opposite of a lot of things, because a lot of people have the presumption of innocence idea.
Really, in my experience, at least in my experience in Christian circles, it's always the presumption of guilt. Just like you're from the instant you're born, you're born into a fallen world, so you're automatically a sinner. So you automatically.
Well, yeah, but there's a age of accountability sort of thing where, like, if they die, before they get baptized or accepted or whatever, that it doesn't count because they didn't know or something like that.
Oh, that's interesting. I haven't heard that before, actually.
Yeah. It's because of that I made Pascal's baby. Yeah. So Pascal's wager.
Yes.
So it combines these two ideas that if there's this age of accountability, then anyone innocent would automatically go to heaven. So then killing babies becomes the best thing that you could do.
Exactly.
If you're using Pascal's wager plus this other idea.
And that's the thing. Either you're born innocent or you're not. And if you're not born innocent, then you're just born guilty for no reason.
Yeah, and then when they die, they just immediately go to hell. I mean, what sense does that make?
Yeah, how is that the good moral thing? And if they are, and then like you said, if they are like immediately from birth, in a sense, saved, then why would you allow them to live any longer? The longer they live, the greater the chance they're going to mess this up.
There's been people
would you have children to begin with then.
Well, there was a mother quite some time ago who had drowned her kids because she thought, she had to send them to heaven because, she didn't want to risk it. Yes. And it's like, well, that's like terrible, horrible. And he's like, well, this is what God wanted, or this is, it's like, and if there was a God and it told her that, and we didn't know, then by the DCT, that would be the most moral thing possible, would be to do exactly what she did, which is why I put UCT in it's just a stupid thing because you can't question God. Apparently, it's like, well, why not? Why wouldn't it want to? If there was a God, I think it would want us to question, and in fact, it'd be like, look, no, question all you want. Have you heard of the atheist God idea?
No, not necessarily. Do you mean in terms of like the Pastafarian flying spaghetti monster?
No.
Okay,
It's the idea that there is a God, but it doesn't want anyone to believe in it. So only the atheists are getting saved.
I've heard a similar idea that like it's like God would be throwing out these different religions to try to throw people off, and that the true path is just to admit that you don't know rather than just presume knowledge. I've heard that sort of variation.
Yeah. Whatever. As long as we're fine and everyone else is wrong, that's all that matters in the end.
Absolutely. That is the end goal.
Yeah. Although I'm usually wrong. What about other things that can creep in? Because we're human after all, and we're going to, at some point, we're going to believe something that we shouldn't. How do we steel ourselves against that? So, like, some political thing, like it's like, this thing, and it's like, well, but it's easy to get caught up in that. But how do you recognize that? How do you steel yourself against it?
My personal way is through always being open to the possibility that I could be wrong and consistent exposure to beliefs that I disagree with. So on Twitter, I follow quite many people that I do not agree with, but I do that. Yes, I'm still doing my interview. I do that so that I'm constantly exposed to other ideas, because the worst thing you can do is surround yourself completely and totally with people who agree with you. If you never are exposed to other views, you'll never know if you're wrong. So that's how I steel myself to that. I know I'm going to believe wrong things, but hopefully if I surround myself with ideas and people who disagree with me, they'll call me out on it and I can learn and grow as a person. Whereas if I'm just surrounded by people who share everything I believe and never challenge me and never question me, I don't think I'll learn anything that way.
I agree, but also you're wrong. See what I did there?
Exactly. That's exactly what I want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, always be willing to challenge whatever it is you hold most dear is kind of my thing on that, what I've said on that. Okay, well, from the background voice, I would presume that perhaps we've gone on long enough.
Yeah, maybe if you had like maybe one more question I could do. But
let's see. Did anyone ask anything in chat? No, nobody had anything for you. They were in their own little world in chat. They were talking to some new guy that's trying to get. I don't know what the belief's going on. So nobody had any question. I'm trying. I get this from time to time. Are you skeptical of skepticism? And I have a response to that, but I'm wondering what yours is.
Yes, that's why I consistently use it. Because, and this goes back to the putting myself around people that disagree with me. The only way I'm going to know skepticism is wrong is if I use it and it turns out to be wrong. So I don't understand how I could be skeptical of skepticism without engaging in it specifically. So if skepticism is not a path that leads to truth, then I will use it and I'll be proven wrong, and then I won't use it anymore.
I think I found a new friend. Okay. All right. Well, your channel's in the description. Do you have anything you want to shout out, like Twitter or whatever else you have? You can throw it at me.
Oh yeah, I have a Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. I get in trouble a lot. You can get in trouble with me too.
I've only been banned twice.
Or come to Twitter and tell me I'm wrong. I encourage discussion.
What's
Watch
your
my
Twitter
videos,
thing?
like, comment, subscribe, all of the above.
At Skeptic, what is it?
At Skeptical Skeleton. A Skeptic Skeleton.
Skeptic Skeleton, not skeptical. That's somebody else, I'm sure.
That is something. I don't want to get sued, so I have to use the right name.
I'll put it in there in the description because I put your YouTube, so that's there. Yeah. Go subscribe to SS and say S words at them. I can't think. All the science says stuff sometimes.
Or tell me I'm wrong and troll. I welcome everything.
Okay. Well, now I have. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you you're wrong. And I'm not sure about the trolling part. Like, okay. Go ahead and say whatever you want to say farewell. I'll say lobsters exist. That's my sign off when I have nothing better to say. So go ahead. I'll let you have the last word.
Farewell. Stay away from the Jewish zombies. I'm sorry. Stay away from the omnipotent Jewish zombies. The regular Jewish zombies are fine.
Goodbye, everybody. Wait,
Right,
I said you. Did you like how I said you'd have the last word, but I changed my mind? Okay, this is the part where I hit the button. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, hit the button. Where's the button? There it is. Okay. And